Welcome to the Hyper Guy Motivational Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I have an amazing guest on. I've known him for many years now. He's one of the most nice, wonderful people I've ever met. And so his name is Scott Shafer. Thank you, Scott, for being here.
Hey, Martine, it's my pleasure. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. So Scott is the senior editor of Politics and Government at KQED. It's a public radio, TV, and online station. He's co-host of the podcast Political Breakdown and senior correspondent of KQED for forever. You did that.
Yeah.
Formerly, he is the chief of staff for the state controller's office, Gray Davis, and he's the former press secretary for San Francisco Mayor Agnos. He has his bachelor's of science in biology, physiology, and chemistry and human nutrition. We're going to get into that because I don't know how he got over into the news side. And he's an avid swimmer and water polo guy. So you have a quite varied background, Scott.
Yeah, I do. It's not a straight line to where I started to where I am now.
Well, I know you
tell me what you want me to tell you.
I know that's what we're going to do. I know you don't have a lot of time today, but I'm so happy you're on here. Can you tell me where you were born and raised?
Yeah, so I was born in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York, famous for the Bills and snow. And I spent my entire childhood there. I was born there and left when I went to college. Didn't go that far to college, about 3 hours into central New York State, Cornell in Ithaca, New York. Spent 4 years there and then spent a year in Madison, Wisconsin, and then came out to California.
What was your life growing up, Scott? Like when you were younger, like what was your relationship like with your parents? And did you kind of know where you wanted to go with your life?
Not really. Neither of my parents went to college. So they were very supportive of me, but they mostly wanted me to be happy. They didn't really say, well, you should do this or do that, or don't do this. They just wanted me to be happy. But just before I get to that, my relationship with my parents was interesting. It was good. It was a good relationship. My parents separated when I was pretty young. My dad was a real character. He owned nightclubs and bars and various other things. Kind of went, a little shady on which side of the law he was on at times, which you would appreciate, Martine. But no, I had a good childhood. I feel lucky, actually, that I grew up at a time before the internet. We weren't distracted by videos and phones. We had to go out and make our own fun. And I had a lot of independence as a kid. My friends and I would just get on our bikes and go ride and go, figure out what we were going to do for the day and play basketball and hockey and football and whatever to keep ourselves, occupied. It was a good childhood.
So you played sports when you were growing up. Were you a good student as well?
I was a better student than I was an athlete. I'll put it that way. I did play sports. I did play a little football, but it was mostly pickup, in the neighborhood with friends, which we had a great time with. I played goalie in hockey. I played quarterback in football. And I was okay. I was not like, no one was going to offer me a scholarship to do any of those things. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Did you start playing water polo back then as well?
I did not. I didn't start playing water polo until I was like 40-ish. And a men's water polo team, it was actually co-ed, but a master's team started called San Francisco Tsunami. And I started playing with them, and I had never played before. I was a pretty good swimmer, but I had never played water polo, and I still play. And I met my now husband. He joined the team, and we, started seeing each other shortly thereafter, and we're still together like 22 years later.
So when you were in high school, I know you have a science background. I want to get into that a little bit. What made you kind of lean toward the sciences?
I don't have a really good explanation for that. I think, because I mentioned that neither of my parents went to college. And so my interests at the time in high school were really politics and Spanish. I really enjoyed learning Spanish in high school. I loved politics. I even, like a friend and I, conducted a public opinion poll on our own by calling people randomly out of the Buffalo phone book when we were 10 years old. But I couldn't see what I would do if I'd gone in to study politics or political science and Spanish at that time. This is like 1975, 76. I couldn't imagine what I would do with that. I mean, now when I think about it, I could think of 100 things to do. But so I decided to be much more practical. And what did I enjoy doing? I really liked gardening. I liked being, outside and literally, planting trees or flowers and stuff like that. So my initial major at Cornell was horticulture, believe it or not. And so when I started taking all these science classes, and I realized this was not what I wanted to do with my life, but I didn't want to throw out all those credits, those science credits. So I transferred or transitioned into focusing on nutrition, human nutrition, which at that time was really a big thing. It still is, but it was just beginning to be a big thing. And so I transferred all those credits, and then I took all these science classes: physiology, microbiology, organic chemistry, lots of human nutrition classes, and so on. And that's what I ended up graduating in. But at the same time, when I was at Cornell, I worked at the radio station as a disc jockey, spinning records. And so that's how I really got into radio initially, was just volunteering, and then I got hired during the summers to spin records, but I was always kind of a news junkie. And so eventually I ended up back in radio, but doing news.
Yeah, your voice is amazing, by the way. I mean, it's just like, I don't know how to describe it. When I think there's a certain voice, when a certain type of voice that gives you a sense of calm. And I think you have one of those kind of voices. And what kind of music did you spin back then?
Oh boy, it was, well, we had free range. We could do what we wanted. And so this is 1977, 8, 9, 1980. And so this was the beginning of the Clash, Blondie, the Cars, Talking Heads, Elvis Costello, but then some vintage stuff as well. The Beatles, Cream, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Neil Young, Pink Floyd. It was Led Zeppelin. It was all that stuff.
Now,
and Joni Mitchell. I love Joni Mitchell.
And did you have any brothers, any siblings growing up, or is it just you?
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 3. So I have an older brother who's 6 years older and a sister who's 8 years older. And so I wasn't super close to them growing up because they were significantly older than I. But so they were out of the house by the time, I was 12 or something.
So what did your parents think when you're like, you're getting your degree in science, and your focus is on science, but you're doing the radio? Did they have an opinion about that? I mean, did you have an idea, this is what I want to do? Or were you still like, kind of like, I'm trying to figure this out?
I was trying to figure it out. I always assumed that I would gravitate toward working in the community, and I did for a while. I worked when I came out here, I worked for the San Francisco Food Bank initially. And then I worked with pregnant teenagers and teen parents, talking with them about nutrition. And so, I think with parents, especially ones who maybe aren't very worldly, like my parents were not, they like to have things that are easy to understand, like, oh, my son's a teacher. Oh, my son's a doctor. Oh, my son is whatever. My daughter is, a computer engineer, whatever. But I think what I did was a little more weird, and I think they probably, I don't know if they fully understood what I did. But they did once I got into radio and politics. That was easy to get their heads around.
So Scott, how did you get into this? You finished your degree. What brought you to California?
So as I graduated from Cornell, I was offered a job in radio in Massachusetts, and I just couldn't see myself being a disc jockey, And so I said, I'm going to go do a post-grad thing in nutrition. And I applied to several programs, and I got into the one at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. So I went to Madison for a year. It was a year-long program. And then I knew I wanted to live in a city, but I didn't know which one. And so a couple friends and I drove cross-country, and we went to Seattle and Portland and San Francisco and LA and San Diego and Las Vegas and Denver. And I just really fell in love with San Francisco. This is 1980, 81. And so I just decided to move out here. And I didn't really know hardly anybody out here at all. Maybe 1 or 2 people So just kind of loaded everything up into my car and drove out here.
Oh my God. And so that's kind of like you took that big leap. When you took the leap, were you scared of doing it? Did you have like any financial resource to last in San Francisco?
I think I just did it. I don't think I did not. I'm not like a trust fund kid. It's not like I had to work as soon as I got out here, and rent was like, it seemed expensive at the time. It was like $400 for a room and with a couple of roommates in the Haight-Ashbury. So it was a great place to be. It was very exciting. But I didn't really like San Francisco initially. My car was broken into, it got towed. And I thought, oh, this place is just really hostile, and I was going to leave. But then, gradually made friends and stuck around and been here, ever since. But, it was,
So,
it was a little, kind of took a leap of faith to come out here.
and so what was the first job you got? Did you have to get a couple jobs and any
Well,
direction?
so I thought I had a job lined up before I left Madison. Working with, I think it was the California Rural Legal Assistance, which works with low-income folks in rural areas. And it was doing food policy. That's what I thought the job was going to be, working on food policy, like in Sacramento and stuff. And sometime between the time I left Madison and the time I got here, that job evaporated. So I came out here and I had no job. So I just had to start looking around, and I ended up working for the San Francisco Food Bank. I waited on tables for a while. Then I got this other job working with pregnant teenagers. And then my employer at that time, luckily gave me time off to do an internship at KPFA radio. And that's where I transitioned. That's why I transitioned back into radio, but radio news.
How did you know you wanted to do that? Did these opportunities just come to you? Or, I mean, it's insane is this just, are people just emailing you and saying, oh, at the time they probably didn't have email, but did they call you, or how did you get these kind of connections?
Oh my goodness. Let's see. In terms of the radio stuff, there were only a certain number of news radio stations, and so you'd make a tape of yourself, and you'd send it out with your resume, and that's how you did it. And you'd either get a call back or you wouldn't. It always helped if you knew somebody, that you could drop their name and say, hey, so-and-so told me to give you a call. And so lo and behold, I ended up getting a couple of little small gigs at local radio stations. And then I got hired to work full-time in Sacramento at KFBK, which is a news talk station. And actually, while I was working there, they hired Rush Limbaugh, who was out of work at that time. So he and I worked at the same radio station. We didn't work together, but his desk was right across from mine.
Did you actually see him all the time, pretty regularly?
Oh yeah, every day I saw him. Yeah, he was a jerk then as well.
It was a rough road with him back then as well. I didn't know that I didn't know he ever worked up there.
Yeah, that's where he launched. He got launched from up there. That's how he became a national show, was from Sacramento. Yeah, he was an oddball. He was very kind of socially awkward. I always got the sense he was kind of a big mouth, but also kind of insecure at the same time, kind of a bully, So I did not become friendly with him, and he was just there, and I was there, but that was about it.
Scott, how did you determine, when you went to the radio station, did you pitch what you wanted to do? How did you know you wanted to do government and politics?
Well, when I was growing up, I was always drawn to politics. My dad was really kind of a political junkie. We always read the newspaper together. I would, on weekends, I would watch shows like Meet the Press and Face the Nation. Most kids don't do that kind of thing. So, it was just something I was, naturally drawn to. And so it made sense, especially when I was looking for a career change to do that. It wasn't like necessarily, oh, I always wanted to do that, but it was like, what are my options based on my skill set? What can I go do? And that was just one of the things, so that's where I gravitated toward.
What was it like breaking into the industry? Because it's totally different. You're a disc jockey, so you're going into reporting. So you're doing the investigation side. So not only do you have to be able to speak well, you have to write as well. So how did you make that transition?
Well, I was lucky. I had the guy that hired me he liked me a lot. And he gave me opportunities. I started off working as a morning editor at like 4 a.m. And then gradually he offered me a hosting job. I was probably like 24, 25 years old. And it was right at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And I remember doing some early reporting on AIDS. And he was just very encouraging, so he really gave me a lot of latitude. And then he and I came down to San Francisco together to work at another radio station where all I was doing was interviews. That's all I did all day long was interviews. And so I did that, and it was great. But then that radio station changed format, so I was out of a job. It was 1986, and that's how I transitioned into politics and campaigns, which I did for a few years.
Scott, when you first started your career, did you have any stories that had a big impact on you that that you were saying to yourself, "Oh man, I can't believe I had to do this," and what those kind of feelings were when you had to do those kind of stories?
Well, I mean, quite honestly, Martine, you and I met you working on a story, which is one of the ones that really sticks with me. I wanted to spend some time with a parole agent. And so the Department of Corrections steered me in your direction. And we met, and we, would go around knocking on doors, I remember some of the crazy things we did and saw. You saw those things every day. I didn't. I just saw them when I was with you. So things like that. And that I kind of gravitated toward a lot of stories related to criminal justice as a result of that. I've been to death row a couple times, been to a number of different prisons. Did a couple stories on people what you do now, the lifers who get out of prison, and what life is like for them and how they make that transition. Those are some of the things. I did some reporting on the death penalty. I mean, those are some of the things that really have stuck with me, quite honestly.
And why are those things so important to you? Like, what kind of emotions or thoughts does it bring up to you when you're doing those stories?
Well, a couple things. One, I think how lucky I am to get to do these kinds of things. I mean, I would have no reason to go to death row or to a prison and talk with inmates and, or a parole officer. But, when you're a journalist, you get the opportunity to talk to people and do things and see things and report on things that you would probably never otherwise get to do. And so there's just a sense of, wow, I get to see this whole world. Whether it's, in a prison or something related to politics, political conventions. I've covered a number of presidential nominating conventions over the years. So it's just exciting to hear people's stories. I love going out, even if it's just random people on the street, and to talk with people and hear their point of view about things. I love getting out of the Bay Area and going to smaller towns, more conservative parts of California. I did a really interesting story about a year ago on a militia-led recall campaign of a Republican supervisor up in Shasta County. Things like that, they stick with me because you find yourself in places where you wouldn't be if you weren't doing this kind of work. I remember some of the people that answered those doors you knocked on, Martine, when we were, it was like, oh my goodness.
So where do your creative juices come from? Do you ever have stress when you're trying to think of a story? I mean, that's probably something that you're doing a story, then you're trying to think of the next story. Who generates those for you?
Well, I typically do it myself. I mean, I do it I have a team that, we collaborate on things. But, fortunately, I'm really lucky. For most of my career, I've gotten to do anything I thought of that was approved by, people above me, which was I was almost never told no, which is really unusual. So there have been, occasionally there are things where people say, hey, can you do this? Or will you do this? But by and large, it's just thinking of things, on my own that I think would be interesting and worthwhile. One example of that is, after Jerry Brown left office in 2000, when did he leave office? 2019, I guess it was. I approached him about doing a series of interviews about his life, an oral history with him. And we did that. And again, I got to go up to his ranch, for over the course of several months, talk with him about his life, record all of that and turn it into an 8-part podcast. And it's just, it's just super interesting. It's all, I almost feel like I'm in school a lot of the time, like, because before I interview somebody, you have to read about them. And, like with Jerry Brown, I had to bone up on his whole life and, the kinds of things I wanted to talk to him about. So it's like a constant learning about whatever it is I'm going to be reporting on. So it's kind of like you're in college.
Did you have any role models when you entered the industry, like people that you looked up to that you wanted to be like or emulate?
Well, back when I first got into radio, it was very different because there was only three broadcast stations, NBC, CBS, ABC. It was before CNN, or CNN was just starting maybe. We didn't have all these like Fox News and, all these kind of siloed sources of news and information like we have now. And so, I admired people like Walter Cronkite, who I thought people trusted. People, he seemed very even-handed and balanced, and I think I still try to do that. But the news landscape has changed so much that it's just very different now. And sometimes they're not always looking for completely balanced stories. They want things more with a point of view, So that's been a bit of a transition. But yeah, I think people like that, people in politics. I'm trying to think. I mean, there were a lot of senators who I really admired. People like I don't know, like this is going way back, but Frank Church from Idaho, and people who were really crusaders for the good guys, I guess. George McGovern to a certain extent, Ted Kennedy, that sort of thing.
Let me ask you. You kind of segued into a question I was going to have for you. Can you juxtapose? You said the landscape's changed a lot. It's got to be extremely more challenging now because we used to have newspaper print, and newspaper print that used to be television and newspaper, and now there's just a million different mediums. How has that impacted your job, and how do you parse out, and how do you focus on dealing with what people are always trying to figure out? Is this fake news? Is this not fake news? How do you deal with something like this?
Well, fortunately, I work for KQED, which is an NPR National Public Radio affiliate. And, here in the Bay Area, especially, we have a very big audience. We're rated number 1 or 2 in the ratings usually. And it's a very highly educated population. I mean, the Bay Area has more PhDs and master's degrees and college degrees than most, metro areas in the United States. So fortunately, there's a real appetite for news it's not just one-sided, it's more nuanced. You provide context, and it's thought-provoking, hopefully, things that are, going to educate people, enlighten people, entertain people. So it's relatively easy. I mean, if I worked for a different kind of a news outlet where, we had to worry about things like clickbait, putting things online that people would click on, just to get the ratings up, it would be a lot less fun probably. But, we're fortunate that we don't have that kind of a model. We don't get money from advertisers. We get it from listeners and viewers, get a little bit of money from corporations, and foundations, but it's mostly from individuals. And so we don't have to, rely on doing sort of sensationalized stories.
When you're out in the community doing different stories, have you seen any type of change in terms of how the community accepts you? And what I mean by that is, I think most people now, unfortunately, because of some of the political trends, they look at the media with a little bit of suspicion. Can you tell that difference? And how do you kind of make people more comfortable to realize that, you're just trying to help? You're actually you're not trying to hurt anybody.
Well, I'm I'm always amazed at how trusting people are and how because they don't have nobody else to talk to me, and occasionally, you go up to strangers if you're, just looking for sort of man on the street kind of comments, and people just don't want to talk, especially if it's about something controversial. But, by and large, I find, especially in the Bay Area, when they find out that you work for KQED, they're like, oh, I love KQED. So if I said I work for Fox or Newsmax or, some other organization, I might not get a reaction like that. That said, I went up to Shasta County a year ago and did this story about this. It was a recall of a Republican supervisor up there, and it was being led by the militia. So it was a very conservative-led, very conservative, right-wing, extremist kind of group. And so I went up there unannounced, and I had to go talk with some of those folks. And my first stop was a barbershop in Cottonwood, California. And one of the heads of the recall worked there as the barber. And I didn't know it until I got there, but he was also the head of the militia. So, I walked into this barber shop, and there's like a Confederate flag on the wall and all these, signs about liberals and, Joe Biden and this and that, Pelosi. And I thought a lot about how I was going to get in there and talk to people, have them talk to me. And so I gave a lot of thought to what I wore. I took the KQED thing off of my microphone, and I had an answer ready. It was all truthful, but I knew they were going to ask me, well, who are you with? And so, I told the truth, but it was not. I would not say it was the full truth. I said, well, I'm working for a statewide show called the California Report, which I was. And it's heard from San Diego all the way up to the Oregon border. And so I made it seem like, oh, that sounds good. Central Valley, it's heard in Fresno, in the Central Valley, it's heard in Sacramento. And so I did what I did. I didn't say, oh, I work for, I live in San Francisco, I'm Jewish, I'm gay, and, I work for NPR. I just didn't say any of those things. But they kind of make a snap momentary judgment. They kind of look you up and down, and they decided to talk to me, so it was great. It was one of my more memorable reporting trips.
So that gets to another question I have is, what's the best part of your job and what's the most challenging part of your job?
Well, I think the best part is the freedom that I have to do so many different things. And I do love talking to people and going out, and hearing people's stories. I think I host a show called Political Breakdown. And we have a lot of politicians on and people who work in politics, and it's a lot of it's focused on their biography. Like, where did they, kind of like what you're doing now? Like, where did you grow up? What was your family like? How did you get to where you are now? And it's just so interesting to hear, because like people, you see them now as elected officials, but the stories you hear, the mayor of Oakland right now, Sheng Tao, we had her on. She was homeless. She had a baby. She was living in a car. And you hear stories like that from people, and it's amazing to me, and that people are willing to share all those things and talk about those things. And so I really like that. The most challenging part, I don't know. I mean, I've done this for a long time now. And so it's like finding things that are really going to get me excited, that I haven't done before. That's like one of the challenges.
If you had to give advice to people in terms of getting into the industry or meeting their goals, what kind of advice would you give somebody if they wanted to break into the news business?
Well, I would say don't get a degree in journalism, which is going to cost you a lot of money. I mean, you can. Some people do. It's fine. It's great. I'm not saying don't do that, but you don't have to do that. I think you get experience. You got to get your foot in the door, be willing to do things that, so I think some people feel like, oh, that's beneath me. I'm smarter than that, or I should be doing something more important, or I should be on the radio, or I should be on TV. Well, no, you have to pay your dues. And I think that you have to be ready for that, and not think that something is demeaning. I mean, and work your way up, but I think getting your foot in the door is the most important thing. KQED and a lot of other stations have internships, for young people to get into the business. A lot of those folks have been hired by KQED. Some of them have been hired by the host of Marketplace. Kai Risdahl was an intern at KQED, at one point. A lot of folks who are on the air now were interns at KQED. So, I would just say, figure out where you want to be and what you want to do, but get your foot in the door and be willing to do whatever it is to, sort of become appreciated wherever it is you are.
Can you tell me how the landscape of your profession has changed? I would say over the last 5 to 6 years, just with the scrutiny and all the different outlets and Twitter and everything else, how's that impacted your job, and how does it change the way that you have to look at things?
Well, I think when Trump became president, a lot of, before that, I think the media, at least where I work, we were very even-handed about things. We tried to present both sides, be even-handed, talk to opponents, talk to supporters. And I think what Trump did with his constant lying and, belittling people and misrepresenting things, whether it was climate change or, the pandemic, whatever, we just realized that you can't, every story doesn't lend itself to being 50-50, and so I think it created a shift where, now we're a little more, we put ourselves into the story, our own point of view sometimes more than we used to do. So, for example, we do more analysis, which is, kind of opinion in a way. You're telling people what you think based on what you know. And so there's a lot more of that. But unfortunately, the downside is that there is this crazy bifurcation of facts, where people think an election was stolen when there's no evidence of that, but they're convinced of it. And, they just go down these rabbit holes, and it's kind of hard to deal with that. And you really can't change people's minds, once they've done that. So they're kind of unavailable to you. So it's a little, it's unfortunate, but it's just the way the landscape is right now.
Have you ever had a story you did where, like you said, it went down a rabbit hole and you said, you know what, this story is not going the way I like it to go, and I just probably can't do this? Or do you just keep going with it, even if some of the things you're saying not necessarily are what you'd necessarily like or not like, but it's just not fact driven? How do you deal with that? Or do you put it out there and you correct it? How do you handle those kinds of stories?
Well, we always have the right to just abandon a story. Like if it's like, oh, that's not going to pan out, and you just drop it, So you certainly do that from time to time. In terms of, sometimes, even though things are going in a direction you didn't expect, sometimes that's okay. You have to go with it. Maybe it's a different story than you thought it was going to be, but it could still be an interesting story. It just wasn't what you were anticipating. So you have to be kind of open to that possibility that somebody's going to, say something or, tell you something, refer you to somebody, and it's going to kind of go off in a different direction than maybe it started off in.
How has the job impacted your life personally?
Well, I feel like I think a lot of people look at the job that I have and they think, wow, that's a really cool job. And there is, a certain amount of people knowing you, it's radio, it's mostly radio, some television, but, I think people in the Bay Area, because we have a big audience, people have, will occasionally come up to me and say, oh, I really like your work or whatever. So, there is an element of kind of big fish in a small pond, maybe, but I think there is a public profile to, especially with, you asked earlier about like social media. Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. There's all those other ways to get your work out there. So I think it's funny. When I was initially getting started in my career, and I didn't really like what I was doing. This is before I got into radio. I just kind of thought, well, I could be one of these people where work is not the most important thing to me. You know, I'm going to have other things going on in my life, but work is not going to be the primary thing. And that has not turned out to be the case, you know, for me. You know, work has been a big, you know, part of my identity, you know, and people, you know, who meet me sometimes will, oh, you know, I've heard you on the radio or whatever. And, you know, I play water polo. You mentioned that at the beginning. You know, there's a lot of younger people on the team, and it's amazing to me that, you know, a lot of them actually listen, you know, probably on their phones. They don't listen on the radio, but, you know, so and I think, you know, they've come to events that I've done at KQED with Nancy Pelosi and, you know, the mayor, things like that. So, you know, it kind of gives you a kind of, I don't know, I hesitate to say this, but it's kind of a, you know, kind of a, I don't know, a little bit of a status, I guess, you know, that you're like, oh, that's cool. You do that for a living, you know.
How do you handle your stress, Scott? I know that you do water. Is there other things that you do in your life to kind of balance your life out? I've known you for quite a while. You're extremely busy. And I think one part we didn't touch on, the job is stressful too. As much as you enjoy it, you have timelines, there's things that you have to meet. And how do you handle that stress?
Well, I do get a lot of exercise. You know, I swim and play water polo. I've started playing pickleball. And so, you know, try to get as much, I do some bike riding as well sometimes. So, you know, that's key. That's really, really super important. And water polo is a very strenuous sport, you know, so it's good it just kind of releases all those endorphins, and, you know, it's great to relieve stress that way. Other than that, you know, I don't really find the work stressful. I find that sometimes the work relationships a little stressful, and I'm a manager of some people, and that is not my favorite thing. But fortunately, they're great folks, and they don't require a lot of management. They're very independent and go-getters, so that makes it a lot easier. But, you know, I try to, if there's something bothering me at work, I'll try to talk to somebody about it, you know, not just hold it in, but try to get it out on the table and deal with it. You know, and sometimes that's successful, sometimes it's not.
I have a few final questions for you. I want to ask you this. I have some good fun questions for you, but I got to ask you one serious question. My last one.
Okay.
Where do you see the future of news going? I mean, I know that you said at some point you're going to retire, but where do you see it going 10 years from now? And do you feel like it's going in a positive direction? It just seems that there's so many outlets now. I think one of the things that people always ask me about is they can't tell whether what's true or not anymore. They don't know what outlet to go to. They don't know how to fact check. What advice would you give people if they're choosing a radio station to listen to, and how do you fact check this? I don't know what advice to give them.
Well, you know, there are websites and that do fact checking. There's something called PolitiFact, you know, and so like they'll listen to a speech like the State of the Union address or whatever, campaign speech, and they'll look for things they'll evaluate the accuracy of it. So, you know, there are places like that you can go. I think there are some organizations that have reputations for being really solid. I think NPR is one, PBS is another, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Now, there are people who think that those are just like left-wing, you know, propaganda, you know, anti-Republican. And, you know, there is a certain amount of truth to that, but I think they are trying to get to the bottom of stories. I mean, the New York Times was just as tough on Bill Clinton and Obama as they, you know, were on Trump in many ways. So I think you just have to go to the news outlets that are regularly awarded for their journalism. You know, do they win a Pulitzer? Do they win Pulitzer prizes? Do they win other kinds of prizes, awards that acknowledge, you know, how good their work is, how important it is, and how much, you know, of an impact it has. But, you know, unfortunately, we live in a time where some people, you know, just don't believe the truth, you know, and they come up with they'll find a place where they have an alternate truth that is not accurate, but which they subscribe to. And they go down, like I said, they go down these rabbit holes, QAnon, you know, Fox News, some of the things that the tangents they go on, and some of them are even worse. Newsmax, Alex Jones, InfoWars, like all that crap, is just crazy. But unfortunately, people are susceptible to it. But, I would try to, do a little research and figure out which organizations are most highly regarded.
Well, we got about 5 minutes to go. I want to ask you these rapid fires here. What's your favorite guilty pleasure food-wise?
There's so many. I would say probably chocolate, dark chocolate.
Favorite place to visit in the world? Because I'm sure you've been to a lot of places.
Oh my God, Martina. I know we've talked about Brazil, you and I. If I had to pick one, I would say, I don't know, Italy, maybe. But I love Mexico. We just came back from Maui, so it really depends. I mean, I do like beach vacations,
And favorite kind of music?
Jazz. I was lucky enough years ago to meet Ella Fitzgerald when I was working in the mayor's office, and saw like 3 of her concerts. I listen to jazz all the time. Just last night we went out to the Black Cat, which is a little jazz club in the Tenderloin, and heard some jazz live. So yeah.
Okay, what advice would the older self give the younger self?
Follow your passion, and don't worry about what people are going to think of you. Just be a good person, and things will fall in place. You don't have to worry that you're never going to find your passion or your the career that's going to make you happy. I think just do what makes you happy, and the rest will fall into place.
If you could meet one person in history, who would it be and what would you say?
Oh my God, Jesus. And I would ask, do you really think homosexuality is a sin? And, I would, the Bible gets used for all these crazy things. And I would want to know, or either him or some of the founding fathers as well. Did you really want people to have semi-automatic weapons?
I had a feeling you spoken like a true reporter. And when you're no longer on this earth, what do you want when they mention your name? What do you want to be remembered by or remembered for?
Yeah, I think, being kind and decent, and, trying to be a good person, somebody who was a good friend. And, the career stuff is, people will remember that or they won't. But I think it's more about what kind of person were you? And, do people remember you fondly? Are they glad they got to know you or that you were in their life? That sort of thing.
And Scott, tell our audience, how can they follow you? You have a lot of different platforms, so maybe you can talk about your podcast and where they can follow you.
Yeah, well, on Twitter, I'm at Scott Shafer. And you can go to kqed.org/ with my name. And, that'll pull up some of the things that I've done there. There's also something called Muck Rack, which is if you create an account, which I have, everything I ever do online, on the radio, on TV pops up there. It's a little annoying because if I do something for NPR and it airs on 50 stations, each station is listed, even though it's the same thing. But that's a good place as well.
Well, I want to tell you, thank you so much for being here. I know you're extremely busy, and I've always thought the world of you. I enjoy your reporting. You've always been kind and fair and just good to people. And I just really, really appreciate you being here today, Scott. Thank you so much.
Well, Martine, thank you. You're back at you. I was so impressed with you the days we spent together, showing me all the hard work you do to keep people out of prison. So it's really been a pleasure getting to know you. And I'm glad we reconnected because we haven't talked in a while. I haven't seen you in well, how many years? So it's good to see you.
We will get together soon, my friend. And
good.
But welcome. And like I said, thank you so much. And please enjoy the podcast. Till next time, everybody, to our next great guest. Take care and keep learning.